Some books are meant to be read. Others are meant to read you. If you ever find a book with no title, no price, and a cover that feels warm to the touch, put it back. And for God's sake, don't let it follow you home. The first time I saw the shop, it wasn't supposed to be there. I'd lived in that neighborhood for 6 years. I knew every store, every street corner, every crack in the pavement. There was a laundromat on that block that had been closed for years, its faded blue awning still hanging limp in the wind, and another just like it on the opposite side, both empty and forgotten. Between them was nothing but a brick wall covered in old, torn posters and years of grime. But one rainy Thursday evening, it wasn't just a wall anymore. The rain was heavy, the kind that soaks through your coat in seconds. I kept my head down, walking fast toward the bus stop. That's when I glanced up and saw it. A narrow, blackened brick building wedged perfectly between the laundromats, like it had always been there and I'd somehow missed it for half a decade. The building seemed too tall for the space it occupied, stretching upward in an odd, narrow way, like it was built to fit into a gap that didn't want it. The windows were dusty and dark, but I could see dim light inside, flickering like candle flame. Through the glass, rows of bookshelves were crammed together, so tightly that only the faintest aisles remained between them. The spines I could see were mismatched, some leaning sideways, some missing their titles altogether. The ones that still had words were so faded that I couldn't make them out, just the suggestion of letters that had nearly vanished. Above the door hung a sign, and though I tried to read it, my eyes kept slipping away from the letters. They weren't in English. They weren't in any language I knew. They looked wrong. Crooked, like they'd been painted by someone who understood the idea of writing but not the shape of the alphabet. I told myself it was probably some antique shop I had just never noticed before, maybe one of those little places that kept odd hours. But my feet moved toward it on their own. When I stepped inside, a tiny bell jingled above the door, but the sound wasn't bright. It was dull, almost muffled, like it had been ringing underwater. The air inside was warm, but not the kind of warmth you get from a heater. It felt old. Stale, like it had been trapped there for centuries without ever being refreshed. The scent was a heavy mix of paper, leather, and something faintly metallic, almost like rust, or dried blood. Every shelf leaned slightly, groaning under the weight of its contents. Some sagged so much I was amazed they hadn't collapsed. The lighting came from a few dim lamps scattered around, their bulbs yellowed, throwing long, warped shadows across the walls. Behind the counter stood an old man. I hadn't noticed him at first because he was so still. His skin was paper-thin and pale, stretched tightly over sharp bones. His eyes were pale, too, not clouded like a blind man's, but faint, like the color had been washed out. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. Looking for something in particular, he asked, his voice as dry as the air in the shop. I shook my head. Just looking. The corners of his mouth twitched, but not into a smile. Then, he said, the book will find you. I'm not sure how it happened. One moment I was glancing at a row of oversized encyclopedias, the next, I was standing at a crooked shelf in the farthest corner of the shop. It felt colder there. The light didn't quite reach the back wall. Every book on that shelf had a little white price tag dangling from a string, all except for one. It was thicker than the rest, bound in a dark leather that looked worn but not cracked. No title on the spine. No lettering at all. It seemed heavier than it should have been, as though the weight inside it wasn't just paper. When I ran my fingertips over the cover, I flinched. The leather was warm. Not the comforting kind of warmth, like a book left in the sun, but the kind that made you think of skin. That's when the old man's voice came from directly behind me. I hadn't heard him approach, but he was standing so close I could almost feel his breath on my neck. That one, he said softly, isn't for sale. I turned, startled. Why not? His pale eyes fixed on me, unblinking. It writes back. For a moment I thought he was joking, but his expression didn't change. Before I could ask him what that meant, he plucked the book from my hands with a kind of slow reverence, as if it were fragile, and set it on a high shelf behind the counter. I tried to act casual, brows raised. Weird rule for a bookstore. Not all books should be read, he said. Then he turned away, as if the conversation was over. I wandered toward the door, still glancing back at the counter. But when I passed the crooked shelf again, I froze. The book was back where I'd found it. That night, I dreamed of the shop again. Only this time, it wasn't crowded and dusty. The shelves were bare, stripped of every single book except for one, the thick leather-bound volume, sitting perfectly centered on the back shelf. The light in the shop was dim, but the book seemed to glow faintly, as though it were breathing. I walked toward it, my footsteps muffled as if the floor had been covered in deep snow. The moment I touched the cover, a whisper rose all around me, too soft to make out the words, too many voices speaking at once. I woke up in my bed, breathless, my skin damp with sweat. The red glow of my alarm clock read 3:07 a.m. My hands were trembling, though I didn't know why. That's when I saw it. Sitting on my desk, a few feet from my bed, was the leather-bound book. I knew I hadn't taken it home. I remembered the old man took it from me and was back on the crooked shelf. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but the door was locked, the windows sealed. I pushed the blankets away and approached slowly, like it might spring at me if I got too close. The lamplight caught the cover, that same warm leather, no dust, no wear. When I opened it, the first page stopped me cold. My name was written there. In perfect, looping black script. The ink still shone wet in the light, a bead of it glistening on the last letter like it had been written seconds ago. I swallowed hard and turned the page. It was a diary entry. My diary entry, only I hadn't written it. Every detail of my day was there. The exact time I left for work. The 2 cups of coffee I'd had. Even the moment on the bus when I'd caught my reflection in the window and thought, briefly, that I looked older than I remembered. I told myself it had to be some elaborate prank. Maybe someone had been watching me, following me. But the next page didn't describe the past. It described something that hadn't happened yet. Tonight, at 3:18 a.m., you will hear scratching at the window. Do not look. I glanced at the alarm clock again. 3:17 a.m. The second I finished reading, the book refused to close. I pressed the cover down, but the pages felt wrong. They didn't bend. They didn't even flutter. It was like they'd been glued together with something thick and sticky, holding them open to that warning. That's when I heard it. A faint, deliberate sound from the direction of my window, scritch, scritch, scritch. I froze, every muscle in my body locking in place. The sound came again, a little louder this time. Not random. Not the wind. It was the sound of claws dragging slowly across glass. I stared straight ahead, refusing to turn my head. The book had told me not to look. The scratching grew steadier, more deliberate, like whatever was out there knew I could hear it, and wanted me to. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Then it changed. The claws began to move faster, frantic, scraping down the glass in long, jagged streaks. Something thumped against the pane, softly at first, then harder, like it was testing the strength of the glass. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms, and kept my eyes fixed on the wall. The air in the room felt thicker, harder to breathe. I thought I could hear faint breathing outside, slow and heavy, just inches away from my head. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence was worse. Against every instinct, I glanced toward the window. Nothing. Just the faint reflection of my lamp in the glass. Relief hit me like a wave, until I looked back at the book. The ink on the page had shifted. There was a new line written beneath the last. Thank you for not letting it in. The words seemed fresher than the rest, almost as if they were still sinking into the paper. And for just a moment, I thought the ink pulsed. From then on, the book never stayed where I left it. I burned it once. Or at least, I thought I did. I placed it in the fireplace, lit the match, and watched the flames eat through the cover. The smell that came out wasn't smoke, it was closer to burning hair. But when the fire died, there was no ash, no charred remains. The book was gone. The next morning, it was in my bag. After that, it began appearing everywhere. On my desk at work. Propped open on the passenger seat of my car. Once, I opened my refrigerator to grab a carton of milk and found it sitting there, its pages stiff with cold, a new entry written inside as if it had been waiting. Each time I found it, there were new pages, each one warning me about things before they happened. Some were small, almost mundane. Don't take the 7:45 bus. I obeyed, and later heard on the news about a collision that killed 3 people. Others were far worse. Do not answer the door tonight. That night, I ignored my curiosity and stayed in my bedroom. Around midnight, the doorbell rang, once, twice, then again, faster, like whoever was there was losing patience. I didn't move. Eventually, the ringing stopped, but long after that, I heard the faint sound of footsteps moving away, not down the hall, but along the walls, outside, just beneath the windows. It became routine. The book appeared, I read the warning, I obeyed. And each time I followed its instructions, I'd see something. Not clearly, never more than a glimpse. Shadows that didn't match the objects around them. Shapes bending at angles no human body could manage. Sometimes, a pale face in the reflection of a dark window, there for only a fraction of a second, gone when I blinked. It was as though the book was keeping me alive, but also leading me somewhere. It was almost a relief when one night the book didn't warn me. Instead, it gave a single instruction. Go back to the shop. Return me. No time. No conditions. Just the words in that same wet black ink that never seemed to dry. I told myself I didn't have to obey this one. I could throw it in the river. I could bury it in cement. But even as I thought it, I felt a pull, like a thread had been tied to my chest and was slowly reeling me in. I left the house without even grabbing my coat. The streets were empty, quieter than I'd ever seen them. No cars, no wind, not even the hum of streetlights. When I turned onto the block, the shop was there, exactly where I'd first seen it, but it looked different. The windows were darker, almost opaque, and the bricks seemed swollen with damp rot, as if the building had been sitting underwater for years. I pushed the door open. The bell above it let out a warped, dragging sound that hurt my ears. Inside, the air was colder, and the smell was stronger, that same mix of leather and rust, only now it was thick enough to make me gag. There was no old man. The shelves were empty, every one of them bare except for a single spot at the back. The wood there was lighter than the rest, as if something had been sitting in that place for a very long time. I walked to it, my steps echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. My hand trembled as I set the book down. The instant I pulled my hand away, the air in the shop changed, denser, pressing in against my chest like deep water. A coldness settled at my back. And then, breathing. It wasn't human. The inhale was too long, the exhale too slow, like something that didn't need air but took it anyway. I didn't want to turn. Every part of me screamed not to turn. But I did. And there was nothing. Only darkness. A darkness so complete it felt solid, swallowing the shelves, the counter, the door. The shop was gone. Something in that blackness shifted, not toward me, but around me. And then I felt it, warm leather brushing my fingertips. They say the shop burned down decades ago. An electrical fire, according to the old newspaper clippings, though the building's address doesn't appear on any modern map. In the grainy black and white photo from the article, there's nothing left but a charred skeleton of brick and warped beams, the windows blown out, the interior gutted. The reporter wrote that nothing inside survived. No books. No shelves. No bodies. There's no record of it ever being rebuilt. No business registered there. No one in the neighborhood admits to remembering it. But last week, as I walked home just after midnight, I saw it again. It was wedged between the same 2 abandoned laundromats, its black bricks wet with rain. The windows were still dark, but this time the faintest golden glow flickered inside, like the pulse of a candle flame. I froze at the corner. The air felt heavier, just like it had the night I returned the book. I told myself to keep walking. That's when the door opened. A young woman stepped out. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her hair was damp from the rain, plastered against her cheeks. She held something tight against her chest, a thick, leather-bound book. Even from across the street, I could see it. The cover gleamed wetly, as though it had just been oiled. She clutched it like it was the most important thing in the world, or like she was afraid someone might take it from her. The door behind her swung shut without a sound. By the time I glanced past her, the shop windows were dark again, too dark, like the glass wasn't reflecting anything at all. She stepped under the nearest street lamp, and that's when I saw it. The leather was bleeding. Not blood, but ink. Thick, black ink, pushing through the cover like water soaking through cloth. It moved in slow, curling lines, forming letters I recognized all too well. It was spelling her name. She didn't seem to notice. She just kept walking, holding the book tighter, disappearing into the dark streets ahead. I wanted to call out to her. To warn her. But when I opened my mouth, the air caught in my throat, thick and cold. And in the glass of the street lamp behind her, I thought I saw the faint outline of the old man, watching me.